Good evening. My name is Rabbi Eliator. Welcome back to the third of our series on foundational figures in the three Western traditions and the three Abrahamic traditions. You may remember that 2 weeks ago, I spoke about Moses and the Jewish tradition. And last week, Professor Reinhold Krauss spoke about Jesus and the Christian tradition. And this evening, we have the pleasure of learning from Dr. Muzammil Siddiqi, who is the Imam and religious director of the Islamic Society of Orange County in Garden Grove. He also chairs the Fiqh Council of North America and the Islamic Shura Council of Southern California. And he is an adjunct professor of Islamic Studies at Chapman University in Orange, California. He is also among the founders of the Academy for Judaic, Christian, and Islamic Studies. And I have been privileged to call him my friend and my teacher for well over 30 years. Professor Siddiqi.
Thank you so much for your graciousness, Rabbi Rolf. It's been very nice. Certainly, we are friends. I don't know the teacher, but we are together, learners and students of our faiths and other faiths. You have to continue learning. Thank you so much. I appreciated very much your presentation. And then after that, Dr. Krauss' presentation, very informative, very educational. So I will begin with my humble presentation here. First to say that Islam means submission to God. And Muslims believe that that has been the way of the prophets of God throughout history. So no prophet was the founder of any religion according to our understanding, but prophets conveyed to the people God's way and the way of submission, the way of surrender to God. Prophet Muhammad was not the only prophet, and he is not the first prophet, but Prophet Muhammad is the last prophet, final prophet of God. And we say that because the Quran tells us, God tells us in the Quran, the chapter number 33, verse 40, that he was the seal of the prophets. So God chose many prophets and messengers from among the human beings. Quran says that for every community, there was a guide, there was a warner. And in the chapter 35 and chapter 16, this has been emphasized. And prophets and messengers were human beings who received the divine revelation from God. And God spoke to them directly and or through his angels and appointed them as his emissaries to human beings. They were people of noble and exemplary character. Some of the prophets were messengers. God gave them special laws, we call it Sharia, or for their people. Not all prophets were messengers, but all messengers were prophets. And Muslims believe in all of them and take their name with great respect and reverence. Muslims believe in all of them. And God says in the Quran, in chapter number 2, verse 136, and other places as well, say we believe in Allah and in that which is sent down to us, that means the message of Allah, and in that which was sent down to Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, and the tribes, that means the children of Jacob. In what was given to Moses and Jesus, and what the prophets were given from their Lord. We do not differentiate between any of them. Further explained in other places in the Quran that differentiate means that believe in some and not believe in others, that we discriminate between any of them. And to him we submit, that means Muslims. So that is very important to understand that Muslims believe in all prophets, and especially 5 prophets are emphasized: Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and the last and final prophet Muhammad, peace be upon them all. Prophet Muhammad was born in the year 571 after Jesus and died in 632. He was born in Mecca in Arabia, which is now known as Saudi Arabia. At the age of 40, he received the divine message. God chose him as his prophet and messenger. The basic message of the prophet is monotheism. There is only one God. La ilaha illallah. That is the creed of Islam. That is the foundational principle of Islam. Worship of Allah alone, without any associate, without any partner. He was against idolatry, injustice, and oppression. Prophet emphasized truth, honesty, mercy, charity, kindness to the neighbors, care for the people, widows, and orphans. He emphasized that all human beings are the children of Adam, and they are all equal. He emphasized also that this life here in this world is not the only life, but everyone will die, and there will be resurrection, and there will be life after death. And this world is a temporary place, and we have to prepare for the eternal world. The tribal chiefs of Mecca, they believed in idolatry, and when the Prophet spoke against idolatry, they became his enemies. They opposed him, and they stood against him. The Prophet was firm and continued his preaching, and slowly it became very difficult for him to continue his work in Mecca. He had some followers who they were persecuted. The chiefs of Mecca decided to kill him. So he had some contact with Yathrib, which became known later as Medina. The Prophet decided to migrate. So he migrated and arrived in the city of Yathrib, which became known after that as Medina. And the city had difficulties and problems. He tried to harmonize the people in the city of different faiths and different tribes. So he united the people of the city and continued giving his message. But the people of Mecca, they attacked Medina several times. And the Prophet and his followers stood to defend the city. The number of Meccans who came to attack were quite large. They outnumbered the Muslims, but Muslims stood vigorously, and Prophet led them into the defense of the city. So they went through a lot of hardship, but they survived and were able to repel their enemies. And finally, the Prophet went back to Mecca and captured it from his enemies. Many enemies were brought in front of him, and he asked them, "What do you think I'm going to do to you?" And they pleaded for mercy. So he said, "Go, you are free. There is no blame on you today." Many of them, they repented and came back and asked for forgiveness and accepted Islam. And the message continued. So Prophet died at the age of 63, according to the lunar calendar. By the time he died, although he started the whole thing by himself alone, by the time he left this world, he gave his people a religion, a holy book, a system of laws and rules, a united country, and of course, many outstanding leaders who became the leaders for the large area. He put the foundation of a new culture and civilization. As far as the role of Prophet Muhammad in Islam, we take it from the Quran. In the Quran, chapter number 3, verse 164, God says, Allah has truly conferred a favor on the believers as He sent among them a messenger from among themselves, reciting to them His revelations, helping them grow in purity, and instructing them in scripture and wisdom, while before that they had been in manifest error. So here you have certain functions of the Prophet, certain roles of the Prophet mentioned. First of all, that he is the recipient of the Quran and the message that came from God. The book did not come all at once. Slowly, revelation came to the Prophet, and Prophet continued teaching whatever it came to him. So it took 23 years for the whole Quran to come to the Prophet, and the Prophet continued presenting it to the people. He made sure that the message is preserved, people memorize all of it or part of it, and recite it. Reading of the Quran and reciting the Quran and memorizing the Quran became a very important work. And he established schools throughout Medina, where children, adults, new Muslims will come and learn the Quran. And the Prophet did not only recite the Quran, he also taught them and explained to them God's words. So he is the first interpreter of the Quran, as mentioned in chapter 16, verse 44. He was the teacher of God's message in a clear and authoritative manner. His explanations are called his Sunnah. So the Quran and Sunnah are the two sources of Islam. And the Sunnah was preserved in the books of Hadith. There are many books of Hadith, almost encyclopedia, of which is a collection of sayings of the Prophet and sayings of his companions to explain what the Prophet said and what the Prophet did and what the Prophet approved or disapproved. He also taught them, as the Quran says, wisdom. And wisdom is actually the way of interpretation, understanding the objectives of what Quranic rules are. The objectives are preservation of life, intellect, property, honor, and religion. And interpretation has to be done in such a way that manifests justice, mercy, and the human interest. So this requires a lot of effort, and that is called ijtihad in Islam. And that all comes from the tradition of the Prophet, from the Sunnah of the Prophet. And it developed, it led to the development of Islamic law, ethics, and spirituality. Prophet, as the Quran says, was to purify people, to make them grow in purity. That means people leave sin, corruption, wrongdoings, and come to the path of righteousness and goodness, love of God, love of people. And that was the way of the Prophet. And so he emphasized that way, and he became the role model for that. So people follow his example. Prophet had many roles. He was a prophet, a teacher, a preacher, an imam. He was also a statesman. He was the ruler. He was the head of state. He was the commander of the armies. He was the judge, as well as a great devoted person, very spiritual person. He used to spend half of the night in prayer. He used to fast very often. And at the same time, he was a family man, a husband, father, grandfather. And so he had a full life, very comprehensive life. And we have the details of his lives preserved by his followers. Prophet's important teaching was that is preparation for the eternal life. He emphasized that this world is temporary. Live in this world like a traveler, like a person passing by. This is not your eternal home. This is not your home. The home is somewhere else. And he emphasized that live your life, just take good care of the world, but at the same time, the real place is the eternal life, and protect yourself from hellfire. So these are some of the basics of Prophet's teachings. Prophet inspires faith. He is a source of faith. Muslims believe in him, trust him, and Prophet at the same time is the role model. The Quran urges the believers to obey God and obey his messenger. And people have to follow his example, piety, mercy, compassion. He is known, mentioned in the Quran, chapter 21, verse 100 and 102, Rahmatul lil Alameen, the mercy for the worlds. Prophet was a very loving person. It is mentioned by his companions that whosoever saw him suddenly was impressed by him, overwhelmed by him. And whosoever associated with him loved him. So he was a very loving person and beloved person. And Quran says that he is closer to the believer than their own selves. So he's highly respected, loved by the believers. They mention him with devotion and pray daily for peace and mercy of God for him. He is not worshipped. He is not considered God. He is a servant of God, but at the same time, he is a highly respected and honored person. One of the Persian poets said it very nicely. He said, "Ba'das khuda buzurg tui qissa mukhtasar." It says that, in brief, I can say this: after God, you are the greatest. So he is great, but not God. And another role that a lot of people do not know, but that the role is that Prophet will be the mediator on the day of judgment. He will be given that honor, that he will speak on behalf of his people, especially those who committed sins, but they were believers. They committed sins, and he will plead for them that God have mercy on them. And also in one of the traditions said it that the prophets of God and all people, they will come to him and they ask him to speak and to plead to God for his mercy. And so he will do that for everyone. So it is a wonderful way of showing the mercy for the worlds. Rahmatul lil Alameen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Siddiqi. Dr. Siddiqi did us the favor of preparing his remarks and distributing them to us on the panel so that we could think about them and respond to them. So I'm going to ask, we're going to follow the same order that we did the last two times. We're going to start with our students first. So Cheryl, if you will, any reactions, questions, whatever.
Hi, thank you so much. Dr. Siddiqi, I have actually, it's sort of a two-part question. So there's a lot of overlap, parallel between Islam and Judaism and Christianity. So my two parts are, one, what makes Islam really distinctive? And then what made it such a huge power force? Like, it swept through and created a state in a really short amount of time. So what do you think was so compelling about it? So what made it distinctive and what was so compelling about Muhammad's message?
I think the message of unity of God, the oneness of God, explained in a very simple way, a very profound way, but very simple way, that appealed to the people. So he emphasized that that is the message of all the prophets. They all told the people that worship God. And the prophet emphasized that. And at the same time, he emphasized that all human beings are children of Adam. They're equal. So that equality of the people and the unity of God and unity of the human beings, that is the message that appealed people. And then also, your second point about, can you say it again? The second point that was mentioned?
What made it so compelling, right? How did it get such a huge following? So if the message, because again, we talked last time about a bit about the Trinity and how that, so whether or not this was a reaction, and we would say we touch on that this week.
The message was never meant for only one group of people. It was meant for all people. So wherever they went, they emphasized that this is for you. The prophet is for everyone. The prophet was not only for Arabs, it's for the prophet for the world. So that is the emphasis that was given by the early followers. They lived wherever they went. They showed kindness to the people. They were not colonizers, even though they went to different countries, but they settled there, they lived there, they become part of the country. It is very interesting that wherever they went, they helped those areas to grow. They did not send all the money to Medina. And so Medina remained a poor city. But wherever they went, they helped develop those areas. Maybe that is the way that is adopting to the people and to the world. Islam has that adapting capacity to be adopted by different people of different cultures.
If I may follow up, was it forced on people? I mean, in Islamic, Cheryl is right. Muhammad dies in 632. By 711, everything from Spain to India is Muslim. Mm-hmm. And the people of the book, Jews and Christians, were allowed to remain that. But my understanding is that anybody else that the Muslims conquered were required to become Muslim. Is that right?
No, actually, in India, when Muhammad ibn al-Qasim came during the Umayyad period, he was quite surprised to see the people, and he sent to the Caliph a note saying that these people are not Jews, these are not Christians, so what should I do with them?
I see.
So the Caliph, it is mentioned that he gathered the people, the scholars, and asked them. So the answer went to treat them like the people of the book. Mm-hmm. Two exceptions. Don't eat the meat that they prepare and they give you, and don't marry their women.
I see. But it wasn't military, as you see it, right? It was by persuasion that Islam spread. That's
been the principle in Islam. That is, people of other faiths, Buddhists, Hindus, Jain, Zoroastrians, and when they went to China, Confucian,
right.
They treated as like the people of our scholars say that these are the semi-Ahlul Kitab. These are semi-people of the book.
I see. Okay. Casey, it's your turn.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Yeah, Dr. Siddiqi, thank you so much for your great presentation. It got me thinking, Christians, we're taught to live by the example of Jesus, but our selection of stories from Jesus's life is relatively limited relative to Islam, where you said there's sort of an encyclopedia of examples from the hadiths. So I was just wondering if you could go into a bit more detail on the sunnah of the Prophet and just to share one or two of your favorite hadiths.
Yeah. The Prophet's, the stories about the life of the Prophet, because the people were around him all the time. And so a lot of hadith is, we were there and the Prophet was with us, and somebody came and asked some question and the Prophet answered that way. Or we were traveling and somebody asked this question. So the Prophet, for example, somebody came and asked that, whom should I, in my family, whom should I treat with more love and kindness? And the Prophet said, your mother. And so the person then, and then whom? He said, your mother. And the third time he asked, he said, your mother. And the fourth time when he asked, the Prophet said, your father. So, I mean, the meaning is not, our scholars say, the meaning is not that three times your mother and then one time only your father. But the meaning is that, especially in the society, in the culture, women were not given a lot of respect, a lot of honor. So his emphasis was, yes, motherhood is very sacred, very important. So you pay attention to your mothers and do not ignore them. Fathers are strong and they can always compel their sons to do something, but mothers very nice, they don't do that. So he said, no, you have to do that. Listen to your mother as well. That's very nice. Prophet also used to show his kindness. In one of the stories mentioned that we were sitting there and then some people came and they were very poorly clad. And looked from their faces that they were poor and hungry. And they say that Prophet's face changed because he saw the poverty on their faces. And so the Prophet stood and gave a speech and told the people that God created all of us from one parent, Adam and Eve. And so people stood. Somebody went and brought a handful of barley. Somebody went and brought some dates. Somebody brought some clothes. Somebody brought this. And in a short while, the Prophet saw a pile of food and clothes and all those things in front of him. And his face was shining. They say before his face was very sad, but now his face was shining. And then he said, whosoever starts some good tradition, he will receive the reward, and all the people who follow afterward, he will receive the reward of them as well. So always try to initiate good things. So he said, you went, somebody went, and then he came, and then after that, a lot of people followed. This is the way. Always start good traditions.
Good, thank you. Hinan, it's your up.
Thank you, Dr. Dorf. Thank you, Dr. Siddiqi. Assalamu alaikum for your presentation. I have a couple questions. Some of them, I think they're more about explaining some things from our Islamic tradition to have it make a little more sense, especially for our non-Muslim audience. One question that came to mind is for our non-Muslim brothers and sisters who are growing up and living in the West, who hear about certain values like freedom of religion, I think they might wonder, in the Islamic point of view, when the Prophet was first preaching monotheism, why was it that in Islam we view idolatry as being so haram, so immoral?
Idolatry means that people are taking idols as God. And that is a violation of God's reverence, God's honor. God is only one. God does not accept anyone beside. The Bible says, I am a jealous God. That is, I am, and I don't want anybody else to be worshipped beside me. So that is the point that is taken in that way. And Islam has emphasized that very much. But that doesn't mean that Muslims mistreated idolaters. Idols were broken in Arabia, but people in other areas, they continued worshiping their temples, and there is no compulsion in the matters of religion, as the Quran says in the chapter 2, verse 256. La ikraha fid din. There is no compulsion allowed in the matters of religion. And then also the Quran says in chapter 6, that is, those who call others God beside God do not abuse their religion, do not abuse their gods. For every people is beautiful whatever they believe. So abusing other people's faith is not allowed in Islam. But yes, there is an emphasis on Tawheed. There is emphasis on monotheism. So monotheism is there. It's very strict monotheism. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that temples to be, the people's religion should be respected. Every person's religion should be respected.
Yes, thank you. I had a couple quick follow-ups. One thing that stood out is we were, in your presentation, using the words prophet and messenger. And I wonder if you could talk about the distinction between and the difference between a prophet and a messenger in Islamic theology.
Now, prophet is Nabi, and in the Hebrew you have Nabi, Nabiim. So prophet is someone who is spoken, but God speaks to him. And Naba means information. So God gives him something. So he received the information. He received a word from God. That's Nabi. The messenger is Rasul. He is apostle. He is the one who has giving a message to give to the people. And so in Islamic theology, it is said there were many prophets, many Nabi, and there were few messengers, few Rasul. And the Rasul is the one who received a special risala, a special message, a special law. So there were few Rasul, but there are a lot of Nabi. According to 124,000 prophets. And among them, 300 messengers. So there are a lot of messengers too. And there is, because for every community there was a messenger. So nobody, it's not that God likes only people of Middle East and he sent prophet there only. Of course, he likes the people of Middle East, but at the same time, other people too. So there were prophets in China, there were prophets in South America, in America, in any place. We don't know them. Quran says that some of them we have told you the story, and many of them we have not told you the story of them. So many prophets are not mentioned. The only prophets who are mentioned in the Quran are 25. And these are, most of them are common prophets in the Hebrew Bible and in the New Testament. So most of them are biblical prophets. But they were known to Arabs. The other people are not. We don't know about Krishna and Lao Tzu and Zarathustra and many others, great figures. We cannot say, but we don't deny. It's possible that they were prophets, but it's possible they were not. So it all depends what are the teachings.
Thank you. And my last quick little question is, you concluded with talking about the prophet's mediation on the Day of Judgment, his shafa or intercession, and I wonder, in our tradition, are there other prophets who will do the same for their communities, or is it just Prophet Muhammad?
Yeah, this is called Shafa'atul Kubra, the grand mediation for on the Day of Judgment. And yes, there are many other people who will do the mediation with the permission of God. The Quran says that Man zalladhi yashfa'u indahu illa bi'izni, who will make intercession in front of him except by his permission. That God will grant permission to some people, not only Prophet, but also other people. God will grant them permission to speak for someone. But then it is mentioned that, Jesus will speak also. He mentioned that in the Quran. And other people will speak. But Prophet Muhammad it's mentioned that people will gather and they will go to Adam, they will go to Noah, they will go to Abraham, they will go to Moses, they will go to Jesus. And all of them say, go to Muhammad. And so all people will come to Prophet Muhammad, and then he will prostrate before God for a long time. And then God will say, Muhammad, raise your head, ask, and you will be granted. And then he will speak with reverence and respect. So that's a very interesting, very beautiful story that is mentioned there. And it is recognized by Muslims in general.
Thank you so much. Jazakallah khair.
When I was in rabbinical school, I had a course on biblical theology, biblical religion, taught by Professor Moshe Greenberg. And on the very first day, he distinguished between biblical religion and Israelite religion. That is a religion of the people who wrote the Bible, and were trying to take the people in a certain direction, as opposed to what the Israelites were actually doing. They were worshiping idols. And a colleague of mine at American Jewish University, Professor Tzioni Zevit, has done a lot of work on the idolatry that was being done at the time. And let me just say that this is not only an ancient phenomenon. I think most religious leaders are not completely happy with what their followers do and what their followers value. And modern day idols don't necessarily have to be graven images. They can be money or power or fame or all kinds of things like that, right? None of which is bad in and of itself, but what's wrong with it is if it becomes the only thing that your life is devoted to. You need to figure out what really is the mission of life and what is worthwhile devoting yourself to, and then seeing all these other things as instruments toward that rather than ultimate ends. And I think idolatry is a mixture of that. In other words, it's a mix-up of that, namely that it places something which is of an intermediate end as being the ultimate end, and thereby undermines morality, good relations, peace, all kinds of things. Okay, sorry. Dr. Krauss, you're up.
Thank you, Dr. Dorf. It's very important that people pay attention to what they say, what they believe, and they put it into practice, not just say it. This is the challenge. Prophet.
Thank you, Dr. Siddiqi, for another fascinating presentation. Over the years, we've known each other for quite a while now, not as long as you and Dr. Dorf, but also a good number of years. And I've heard several presentations by you on Islam. And what strikes me each time and again today is two things. The inclusive nature of the religion, that Islam affirms all the preceding prophets as genuine. So we have differences, we disagree, but among our three traditions, perhaps Islam is the most inclusive and the most generous. I'm speaking as a Christian. Jews started it all, and in some sense, there was not the issue of recognizing another who arose. But I'm always impressed by the generous spirit of Islam and the Quran. And the other one is what came through in your presentation is your genuine love for the Prophet Muhammad, this esteem that he is considered not divine, but truly treasured. My question is a bit philosophical, perhaps, and that is, Muhammad received the Quran over many years, 23 years, I believe.
Yeah.
And how do Muslims conceptualize how that happened? The angel Gabriel in the cave initially spoke to him, but it seemed to be an experience that was quite mystical, in that he saw angel Gabriel all around the horizon. So it doesn't seem to be an encounter of two people simply talking to each other. So I wonder whether, I'm sure Muslim tradition has thought about this. Did Muhammad intuitively understand the revelation and then expressed it in Arabic, or was it dictated to him in Arabic? In other words, what is the role of the human medium in the transmission of the divine message?
Yeah, that this is not just one experience in the cave of Hira. This experience happened often. Sometimes the Prophet by himself, sometime in his home, sometime in his community. And the people watched him going through this. He would put his head down, and they'll see even in a cold day, perspiration on his head. And then he feel like he is under a lot of pressure. And then he would raise his head and start reciting these beautiful words of the Quran. And he said, Gabriel came to me and he gave me this message. So in the beginning, Prophet went through a lot of experience of learning how to listen to Gabriel. Sometimes he was repeating after him. He would hear the words and he would try to repeat them. And the Quran God instructed him that listen, don't repeat. And we will help you remember that. You'll remember that, and we'll make you understand it. So he was also sometimes shaken by this experience. So this is the message is given to you, not that you be afraid, but you calm down. You have to listen to it and give this message to the people. Message was sometimes consoling him, sometimes reminding him, sometimes even correcting him, telling him that, why did you do that? You should not have done that. Your people should not have done that. So it's quite often it's reminded that. And this is all there in the Quran. I mean, that even the revelation is criticizing the Prophet, and the Prophet is listening to that very carefully and giving it to the people. So the people recite it. I mean, for centuries, people are reciting that, talking about that. And a blind man comes to the Prophet while he was sitting with some of the chiefs of Mecca. And he thought that it's a good opportunity to give them the message. And maybe they will listen to his message. And the blind man, follower of the Prophet, comes and he says, I have some questions. And the Prophet kind of frowned. Why is he at this time interrupting? And the verse came, and the whole chapter came. He frowned, he turned away because the blind man came to him. And who knows who will listen better? And who knows who is good? So you should pay attention. So that is the way. I mean, this is what Quran is all about. So Prophet always paid attention to the message of God. And this happened again and again and every time whatever it came, he would recite it in his prayers, in his sermons, and he'll ask people to learn it and to memorize it. And Gabriel would come to him every month of Ramadan and listen to him, whatever he has memorized, and correct him if he made any mistake. And this is the way they both studied the Quran together. So Gabriel was his teacher as well as his the one who's learning the Quran together, and they're studying the Quran together. So yes, this is a fascinating thing, and this the style of the Quran, the language of the Quran is very distinct from the language of Hadith, the style of Hadith. So it remained that way. It is very poetic. It has a rhythm, although it's not poetry, but it has a rhythm. It has a melody, and it is a joy to listen to the Quran, and people are never tired of listening to it, and they listen again and again and again. And the Prophet himself said, "This will not wear out because of a lot of use." So it is, and its wonders will not end.
I have a couple of questions, if I may. In the Torah, the patriarchs and matriarchs and their families are almost all dysfunctional. I mean, they're shown as being very flawed human beings, frankly. And even Moses is not perfect. I mean, he hits the rock rather than speaks to it, and therefore he's not allowed to go into the promised land. He kills an Egyptian who is beating an Israelite. That may either be good or bad, depending on how you evaluate that. Does Muhammad ever do anything wrong in the Quran?
The Prophet as a human being, yes, he was a human being, but at the same time, in the presenting of the message of God, he does not do wrong. The message of God, he does not. And he is not, no prophet in Islam. Not only Prophet Muhammad, Prophet Moses, Prophet Jesus, even David and Solomon are exonerated with many things in the Quran.
I see.
That people accuse them, and that God has honored them. So David is honored in the Quran. Solomon is honored in the Quran, and many other prophets of God. Even Jonah, even though he's criticized for his leaving the town, but at the same time,
Right.
a lot of honor in the for Jonah as well. And Prophet himself said, "Do not criticize Jonah." Some people said that Jonah was like that; he ran away. So Prophet said, "Don't say that about Jonah." So yes, prophets as human beings may make mistakes, but they do not commit sins, according to Islamic tradition, and they do not misrepresent God.
Okay, so then the Quran then led to a very rich legal tradition,
Yes.
right? And with a variety of different legal schools, as I understand it, during the Middle Ages, right? Which did not always agree with each other, right? So even if you assume that what what Muhammad said was was absolutely the perfect message, the fact that it then gets interpreted by human beings, right, does somewhat undermine its divine authority, doesn't it?
That interpretation should be done.
Right.
Required that we should do that. There are various ways of interpretation. Some people do it literally. Some people do it metaphorically.
Right.
Some people do it mystically. And some people do it very legally. So you have different ways of interpretation. We don't have to agree with every interpretation.
Right.
People have a right to do that. And
so what for a Muslim, what determines for any particular Muslim,
is that
what for any particular Muslim, what determines what is authoritative? In other words, is it the particular Imam of the community to which he or she belongs, or is it what makes most sense to that person, or is it something else?
Well, if somebody makes obvious mistake, people have to say that this was linguistically is wrong. If you compare what somebody said in one place in the Quran, and then you have to see that how in other places same thing is said. So the text explains itself. So intertextuality is there that
Yeah.
you have to get and understand. And the Quran versus the Hadith, you cannot say that Quran is contradicting the Hadith or Hadith is contradicting the Quran. If that is something like that, then you have to see whether the Hadith is authentic or not. So you have to go and check the authenticity of the Hadith as well. So all
Right.
of these things is a very complex kind of tradition of interpretation. And but it is emphasized to do that. And the Prophet said, when a person makes the effort, he will receive the reward for the effort. If he's right, he will see double reward. If he makes a mistake, he will still receive the reward because
Right.
he made an effort.
You understand, the reason why I'm probing you here is because in the Jewish tradition, we have the exact same issue,
Yeah.
right? We assume that the Torah is authoritative, but then it's interpreted in multiple ways in the tradition. And then the question becomes, well, if it's interpreted this way, that way, and that way, which one of them do you follow? Do you follow your rabbi, or do you follow what you think is most authentic, or and it leads to a lot of arguments, and I know that happens in Islam as well.
Yeah.
Let me ask you another question. There is the mystic, the Sufi tradition in Islam. Does it interpret Muhammad as being anything other than a human being?
Some Sufis have gone that way, but that does not represent the true Sufism. But some of them have considered him as almost like a divine figure. But the Prophet, pre-existence of the Prophet, or prophets everywhere, and he knows the hidden things. These kind of statements come out from some Sufis. They will say that they're doing that in their ecstasy of the love. Some of this kind of outrageous statements are there, and they're criticized also. I mean,
Right.
Some of
But I take it that's a real minority
some
within.
people take it more in the sense of this person did that out of love.
I see.
Other people are very critical, and they are sometimes they call them blasphemies and all this thing.
Right. Yeah. And in any case, I would imagine that that's a small minority among Muslims, right? The Sufis.
Sufis, but not all of them. I mean, some of them are great people. They've been explained their.
Understood. I'm just saying that for those of us who don't know a lot about Islam,
I mean,
if we're talking about the mystic section of Islam.
We have a trend in Sufism called pantheistic. So, pantheism is that way. That is, everything is God.
I understand.
God is all in all.
Right. I want to ask you one other thing, and then I'll stop. And if anybody else would like to, please chime in. Islam also has a very rich philosophical tradition from the Middle Ages into modern times. Some of which, as in Judaism and in Christianity, was influenced by Plato, some by Aristotle, and the schools of the time, right? Do they ever really differ a lot on the nature of Muhammad or his message, or are there the disagreements more about how you come to know God, how you come to know what is right, things like that, right? I mean, do the various schools of theology in Islam understand Muhammad differently, or for all of them, is he more or less simply a human being who was the ultimate prophet?
There are varieties of understanding, and among the philosophers, there are some who, the way they speak, compromise even the question of Tawheed, the monotheistic tradition. So Al-Ghazali criticized that very much, and he called it inconsistency of the philosophers. Then some other philosophers, they wrote about Al-Ghazali's work, said inconsistency of the inconsistency.
Yeah.
This debate went on among the philosophical tradition. The philosophical tradition is also very rich in Islam, but it did not take a central place in Islamic
Right.
tradition. It remained as an intellectual exercise that some people did, and sometimes they remained within the boundaries of Islam. Some of the time they went beyond that.
In contemporary Islam, do you have philosophers that talk about different understandings of God or different understandings of Muhammad?
Sometimes, but not, I don't think, very profound or influential, but there have been some for some people.
So most of the development of Islam now is on the legal side as opposed to the philosophical side?
Legal sides, and then also the theological side, doctrine side, there, but not in the more philosophical and mystical side.
Uh-huh. Good. Any in America?
We have some people who are working on that, and we had a very good scholar, passed away in Chicago. He was a professor, Dr. Fadlur Rahman. He wrote on the philosophical tradition of Islam.
I see.
And a number of other people who work on that.
Are those both available in English?
Yes,
somebody?
yes, he's working in English.
Good. Okay.
But you know
Because-
more about these things.
Because I mean, I know that what's happening in both Christianity and Judaism is that in the 20th century, now the 21st century, there have been a lot of different theologians who have written various kinds of understandings of God, in Christianity of Christ, and Judaism of Jewish law and Jewish and Torah and all kinds of things like that, right? There are a lot of contemporary Jews and Christians who have developed various kinds of theologies and and all of that. And I was just wondering whether the same thing is happening in Islam.
Nasser is a good person. He has summarized these traditions well. Dr. Sayyid Hussain Nasser, do you know about him?
I do not know him. No, go ahead.
He is at Georgetown University. He has written extensively on philosophy, on mysticism both.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Good. Is philosophy taught at Muslim seminaries? I mean, how do you become an imam? Let me put it that way.
When there's study of Quran, Quranic interpretation, study of Hadith, methodology of authentication of Hadith, interpretation of Hadith, the seerah of the Prophet, the life story of the Prophet, the fiqh, the Islamic law and jurisprudence, the principle of law, the methodology of law, the schools of law, and different aspects of law. Of course, the extensive. So people sometimes they study the law related to acts of worship. Sometimes they study law related to family life, or the law about business, economics, sociology, all these different aspects of law that people study and specialize. And then people also study history, the civilization, the culture, and philosophy of Islam and mysticism of Islam, all of this. And comparative religion now people will be introducing now in the seminary.
Is it possible to go to a seminary, a Muslim seminary in the United States? Do they exist in the United States?
People are starting. These are some of them very traditional type, but some of them are more open to others. So there are some efforts are going on for that.
I understand. Good.
But a lot of people, when they want to do more thorough and deep study, they go to Egypt or they go to Saudi Arabia or and some other places. Of course.
And at the moment, it's only men who can do that, right?
Unfortunately, some of the places where people used to go for study, like Syria, is in trouble. So most of the work is not going on there. Yemen, people used to go and study there. Some people go to Mauritania in North Africa, Western. Mauritania has a good tradition of Islamic learning. and great scholars.
But only men can become imams, I take it, right? Not women.
Imam in the sense of leader of the prayer, that's only for men. But Imam in the sense of a scholar, a jurist, a teacher of Quran and Hadith, that's not limited.
Good.
One of my friend, he is in England. He collected the contribution of women in the Hadith.
Wow.
He prepared 50 volumes. Each volume is almost 400 pages.
Oh my goodness! Wow. Good.
He found that he was himself surprised that there are so many women Hadith scholars.
Okay, I'm afraid we're already at 6:31, so we're going to have to stop. And I want to thank Dr. Siddiqi in particular, and to thank everybody who has taken part in these 3 sessions, and to all of you who have listened to them and hopefully learned from them. Be well. Shalom Aleichem. All good things.
Thank you very much.